So we have had really a really very special opportunity for our students in terms of the internship exchange and the vitality of that. And it's always seemed like, though it just was on the verge of disappearing, you know, it turned out that there was again some interested individuals who just sort of took it over. And we have, from time to time, we have had a very active advisory board. And again, it takes a lot of work to keep an advisory board, you know, kind of relating. It's this whole question of time to be spent on budgets, time to be spent on planning, time to be spent on having the logistics of getting the advisory board meetings, you know, looking responsible and professional, because here are now businessmen looking at, you know, the future coming along, and so you want them to have a really good impression of what's been going on. And again, Arthur has of course been one of the real support pinnacles for that. It's been really great to have him on board. And the same way Lily Hein has likewise been part of that. So those two have been very much a strong bridge in a way that always has sort of made sure that there was left something of the chapter, even though it just looked like it was in shambles. So it's been I think a good organization, and from time to time it has had direct support from the business school when it has been really active and maintained good relationships. And then at other times the relationships have been at a low point. But I think in the final analysis, ISEC has tended to move across the ability to get increased competence in languages, also the familiarization with business management and the values of other cultures and how you sort of relate in order to potentially become active in international business. And at the same time, in later years, ISEC very clearly went on for the notion of creating increased friendship relationships, and it in effect saw itself as having a role to play in a degree of peacekeeping around the world by creating personal relationships. And so, in some sense, it reminds me very much of the Rotarians. I'm a Rotary member, and I always think of the fact that it essentially had its basic startup as a tit for tat, and then it increasingly became a contributor to attempting to create a better world, a better society, a peaceful society. And I think ISEC has very much had that same in mind in a later period. Okay, now...
Okay. We have a couple just structural things that we wanted to know about you so that we can kind of paint the picture of why ISEC. So if you could talk a little bit about your background and your life before you met ISEC or thought of ISEC, so your home, your college life, anything like that.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Well, you know, my home city is Helsinki or Helsingfors, as it is known in Swedish, and so my home language was Swedish, but I had a wise mother, so she put us kids in Finnish-speaking play schools so that we got the Finnish base for what is after all the language of the majority. And then I had the chance to move on to a very successful high school in Helsinki, and in the process I happened to be destined to be a student. I like to be a student. I preferred nothing else but being a student, which meant that also meant that my athletic activities basically at zero levels throughout, which has unfortunately also been reflected in that my two boys have not seen much athletic activity as being worthwhile. I still remember once taking my younger son finally to see a football game here in Seattle, and we sat there with all my friends, you know, and then he piped up loudly, "Dad, this is boring. Why are we here? We could see this better on TV at home." Everybody was laughing because he was, of course, right. He didn't understand the ambiance. Well, anyway, so I was, you know, frankly, I was a good student, which meant that I could basically have had access to whatever professional path I would have wanted to, and I think I was a great disappointment to all my teachers when I chose to go to the business school, nowadays known as Hanken in Helsinki. But I had, you know, seen my father creating his own transport business, and my mother was his bookkeeper and did the accounting. And I had been a very busy seller of Christmas publications at Christmas time, made money, and you know, I just kind of felt that business was a good place for me. And so I finished my first bachelor's degree then in accounting and economics at Hanken in Finland. And in that process I was also involved with student organizations. I was the secretary for the student body in Hanken, and then I became the social secretary for the Swedish-speaking student body of Finland. And now I had a payoff on my languages, because it turned out that I was one of the few who knew English. And so I had a chance to represent the student bodies in Finland at a particular conference in Oxford, where students from early warring countries came together for the first time. And I had a room at the Brasenose College in Oxford. And you know, when the scout, when he came in, pulled the curtain off, had tea, and said, you know, "Your tea, sir." I was thinking, this is what I should have had. But we had 3 great weeks with very important speakers who were kind of cluing us in on how we should look at the world and what the world looked like after World War II. But what it left with me was a real appreciation for Oxford. And so later on with my 2 sons, you know, luckily my oldest son went to Trinity College in Cambridge, and my younger son got a Rhodes Scholarship to go to Oxford. So I have both light blue and dark blue represented in the family. And I thought that was really nice. If you can't do it yourself, you know, vicariously you can do it. So that in a way was kind of an international dimension relating to me. And then of course it was this question of a job, and I interviewed for a job in Finland, but I had on my plan the visit to Paris for Isaac, and so I postponed signing in for a job, and so I left to be gone 4 weeks. I'm still on the same trip, never returned. You know, I said yes everywhere, and you know, suddenly things happen when you are open to things to happen to you. And I received a scholarship at Oregon State, and that was while I was in Paris, and so I wrote home and said, well, I'm going to go for a year to Corvallis in Oregon for my master's degree. I wanted an MBA. Really turned out that at that time Oregon State didn't have a master's program. So I went for a regular American bachelor's degree. And then interestingly enough, the Oregon State Business School really had been way ahead, because it was actually the School of Business and Technology. And so I got excused from a whole lot of courses, but my technical minor was forest technology, because I was thinking of returning back to Finland, which is a forest products oriented country. And I had a great time at Oregon State, and I'm a beaver, and as you know, beavers eat ducks, you know, they are at the University of Oregon, south of Oregon State. But I didn't have an MBA, and I had, you know, been talking with somebody and said, well, we have 10 rich universities in the Midwest, surely one can afford you. So I thought that sounded good, so I wrote to all 10, and I had one positive response back, and that's all I needed. A new department of management had been established at University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. And the chairman, in fact, wrote to me and said that he had just received a graduate fellowship, and he was willing to allocate it to me if I called him, because he needed to have it done by Monday. So I called him Friday and said, thank you. And I had already then been hitchhiking between Corvallis and Seattle, and Corvallis and Portland, and I had been kind of training myself doing that. So I thought, well, to keep my expenses down, I'll hitchhike from Oregon to Champaign-Urbana. So I hitchhiked down along 101 into San Francisco and Los Angeles, and I averaged 40 miles an hour, including lunch and dinner, so it worked very well. And again, it was because a lot of people had been, during World War II, themselves involved with hitchhiking from their bases and so on. However, I have never picked up any hitchhiker. I do not recommend it to anybody. But it worked for me, and so, and then my final ride was actually a straight, no stop, from Long Beach, California to Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. And then finished my master's degree, and then the chairman of the department called me and said, look, I need somebody to teach management. If you hang around for your PhD, I'll have a guarantee for you of food on the table. So I said, thank you. And so I remained and studied within the field of business. So I had, as my areas actually, economics, marketing, finance, and management. And that's where I found my wife, who was from Norway. I had been involved with the student YMCA, and one day the secretary said, well, because the student YMCA at that time at the University of Illinois functioned as the kind of foreign student office, and so they got all of the applications that were then approved were then funneled to the Y office. And so he said, look, Bud, there are 3 beautiful girls from Norway. I bet one of them will just fit you. There was one, you know. And so that led to marriage and our first child, our son Bo. So you never know what's going to happen to you. And then eventually, of course, it was a question of work. You know, where will you have your career? And first we decided that, well, Norway wasn't right for me. And my wife said, well, Finland isn't right for me. So we decided, let's make Seattle our compromise. And so, a couple of years. That was 53 years ago.